for a long time, I've been on the side of this. I've thought players should get paid for their hard work, right? I know what it's like to play the sport of football. It's hard. It's hard on your body. It's hard on your mind. It's hard to keep your grades up while you're doing that, right? And I've long been on the side that they should get paid. But when you take into account how much schools will potentially have to give up and have already given up to pay players, it really doesn't seem worth it. So what I'm talking about here is when the door to paying players gets opened, it kind of creates this whole unintended cascade, right? Because schools will not magically generate more revenue when they pay players. So say a top line SEC school gets, $70 million a year in TV revenue. I don't know how accurate that number is, but it's ballpark, right? Then, presumably a good chunk of that is going to go back to the football team to upgrade facilities, pay coaches, do things like that. Some of it is going to go to players in the form of NIL and to the collective, sort of like that. It depends how their relationship works. And some of it, a big chunk, is going to go to the rest of the athletic department. Because the athletic department will use that revenue to help fund lower down teams, right? So think field hockey, soccer, in some cases even baseball or softball, rowing, swimming, diving, things like that, right? All the other sports that are still compete at the same level as football does, but do not produce revenue. And so they need, things to cover their travel costs, the cost of uniforms, the cost to maintain their arena of whatever sort. And because at most programs and in almost all colleges, those don't generate revenue, those sports, football not spending all its money is what they rely on to get their budget. So now that you open the door to, I believe the wording was it was at minimum 22% of football revenue would go to paying players, and that could be raised up eventually and changed depending on how it works out. But that 22% of revenue is something like, if it's $70 million, that's at least several $1 million that is being taken away from those programs. And for context, so I believe the budget of, I think it was University of North Carolina, their men's and women's swim team combined, their yearly budget was $250,000. So that is several times over the yearly budget of one of those smaller teams. So it really does make an impact, and it really will. I think you'll see a lot of those teams shuttered or perhaps at least changed as a result of this. Because now that money is going to football players, right? And even if they only get paid $30,000 or $60,000 each, which certainly seems like a fair salary when you look at it from the football perspective, they put in a lot of hours. But that's depending on, 80 scholarship guys at least around there in a Power 5 football team that are going to get $60,000. So that is several $1 million that are now going to paying them instead of helping keep those further down programs afloat. And we've already seen this effect somewhat, as some schools have had to, get rid of lower down programs, kind of shove them in the bin, right? To pay players with NIL. We've already seen that some, especially at smaller group of 5 universities and things like that. But I think we're going to see it more now that they can pay directly and don't have to jump through all the hoops of NIL. And now that pay is going to be a direct question in terms of recruiting. And the more money you have available to pay your football players, the better your football team is going to be. And now that they can pay the players directly, they don't have any reason to justify giving that money back. And now the athletic director may try to demand it, and I don't know how that's going to work, but that's an individual university thing. Because there's no a lot of regulation, what this court decision has done, House versus NCAA, is it's taken this big burlap sack that has contained in it a bunch of cats, right? And they've just tossed it, and all the cats went every which way. And I mean, there's Georgia, a cat that looks like Georgia over there. There's a cat that looks like Texas over there, and then there's Texas A&M, the weird looking maroon cat, and then there's Michigan and Ohio State fighting in a corner, and it's really created a huge amount of controversy, right? Like there have been questions over Title IX. Does 50% of the revenue have to go to female athletes? Does 50% of the revenue does it have to be split evenly? Does it have to go evenly to the sports? Because they all do work, right? But they just don't generate revenue. Does it have to go? Where does it have to go, basically? And there's a lot of kind of equality questions, and it's a very thorny question. And hopefully we'll eventually be able to bring you guys more clarification on this. But it is really a thorny topic. And again, I would encourage you, as best you can, to think twice before you say, oh, this is great, right? Because it's going to have ramifications for other sports. I know on this podcast, we're not concerned about women's field hockey at the University of Alabama, but it's going to have an effect there. And I think it's important to recognize that effect and understand that if our kind of blindsided, just having justice in the space of football, because this certainly is that, right? Players deserve to be paid. They work hard. Just having justice in the spirit of football does not necessarily mean that it's completely just across the spectrum. And now I think it's an impossible question to answer, and I think regulators are going to do their best and may come up with a really good answer. They may come up with a crap answer, and we're going to kind of have to live with it, and recruiters are going to have to deal with it, and everybody else is just going to have to live with it. And so that's kind of how it is, right? And I've heard stories, particularly from the University of North Carolina, in a really excellent piece I'll try to link in the description. I believe it's the women's field hockey coach talks about how she was always a very big supporter of the football team because it got them more money. So you can see how there's that direct relationship and how it really makes people and has different effects and can create a lot of struggles lower down the order.